Welcome everybody to Formula One Weekly, the first ever episode of the weekly show, rounding up all of the news in the world of Formula One. If you've been following my channel for a little while, you will know that I've been doing Formula E Weekly now for 3 weeks, but I've finally decided I'm happy with how I've set up that show and I'm ready to set up the Formula One equivalent. Obviously, I've seen Formula One for much longer than Formula E, and I know much more about Formula One compared to Formula E, so it's about time I got this series up and running. Also in Formula One Weekly, I will be covering Formula 2, and the idea for this show is not only to cover the big stories, but also the smaller stories, which I didn't quite have time to fit in to a video of its own. I'll also be mentioning any new books, documentaries, films that have come out in the previous week, or anything that I feel, any articles or YouTube videos I feel you guys should check out. And I'm also considering doing a monthly episode, but it's not going to be Formula One monthly because that'd be stupid. But I'm thinking about doing it for the maybe upcoming month. So I'm either going to call it maybe Motorsport Monthly or Formula Monthly. And so, for example, the next episode of that would be the February one. So at the beginning of February, I'd say what races are going to be on in that particular month, what special events are happening, that sort of thing. So I'm also considering that. So I'd appreciate it if in the comments you put your thoughts on that, if you'd like to see that, or maybe I'll just give it a bash once or twice to see how it goes. So, as you can tell, it's Monday, and if you don't know it's Monday, then you're a bit of an idiot, really. But it is Monday, and you may have noticed that in the title I've classed the video week commencing the 15th, and obviously it's the 22nd today. What I'm going to do is bring out the F1 Weekly on a Monday and cover the news from the previous week. I'm doing this because on a Sunday, usually, there'll be a Formula One Grand Prix, and so what's going to happen in the season is that I'll review the race on the Sunday, and it seems like after the race, after the review, it'll be a bit much to then do a Formula 1 Weekly as well as a Formula E Weekly. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to push the Formula 1 Weekly onto the Monday. I'll revise that later on in the season perhaps, but for the moment it will be on a Monday. So then, let's get into what you've all been waiting for, why you clicked on this video. Let's see the news of Formula 1 in this past week. No big stories except the Sorokin finally joining Williams. However, we have had our first launch dates revealed, and arguably 3 of the biggest teams in the sport are the only ones to have announced them so far. The reigning world champion Mercedes will be revealing their car on the 22nd of February at Silverstone, but they have already revealed part of their car in a little teaser video over Christmas. I did a video on that. Not too many of you saw it, so I will put a link of that down in the description or in the iCards if you just wanted to have a little 5-minute checkout of that. Very spicy indeed over Christmas that was from Mercedes. We've also had Ferrari announce their release date. They were the first actually to announce their date, and theirs also on the 22nd of February. So that's going to be a very interesting day to see the liveries of both Ferrari and Mercedes, though I think we can all guess they're going to be silver and red, so maybe not as interesting as you would think. But following that, on the 23rd of February, we have the McLaren launch, and I think this is going to be a very interesting McLaren launch. Will they stick with the orange? Obviously, they will not be partnering with Honda for this season, they'll be partnering with Renault. So will they change up their livery? Bit in debate. I think they'll stick with the orange. I do love the orange, so I'd be gutted if they got rid of it this quickly. However, it's not quite out of the realms of possibility. They're the only release dates that have been announced so far. So let's move on to the next topic, and I think this is a very interesting topic, which I think I'm going to actually do a separate video on, maybe when more information has come out, but it's about future F1 races. And there's been a lot of speculation about races coming onto the circuit. Copenhagen, for example, and Zandvoort really look to be taking charge of that list. However, it's come to fruition that Vietnam, a real surprise country I feel to have a Grand Prix, they've put in a bid. And apparently they'd done this back in 2010 when Bernie was in charge, and then in 2013 again when he was still in charge. But both times Bernie said no, because he was not happy with the backlash from the likes of the Singapore Grand Prix, the South Korean Grand Prix, Baku, where they weren't traditional circuits, and people were not happy that tracks like the Nürburgring, Hockenheim, France, Indianapolis, all these big major tracks that had had history in Formula 1 were being taken off the grid for these brand new circuits that have no history whatsoever. I personally don't always have a huge issue with that, but sometimes, yes, it can be a big issue, and I think losing a German Grand Prix every other year is a big issue in the sport at the moment, especially where the calendar is concerned. So yes, Liberty Media want to make this a 25 race season by the look of it, which personally I don't have any issue with at all. I know some drivers say it's a bit too much. Yes, I think that is arguable, but we never used to have this huge summer break which we now do. So I think most drivers would be able to cope. I really do. Obviously, like I say, I don't know the insides of and out of Formula 1 like that, so I wouldn't be able to tell you obviously what particular drivers think. However, over the years I've been watching Formula 1, I know they've not been in favour of an increased calendar length. But like I say, again, I don't think that's out of the realms of possibility. Vietnam though, we'll see. Apparently it's going to be another street circuit. We've got 3 currently on the calendar, 3 main ones in terms of Monaco, Singapore and Baku. Obviously Albert Park in Australia technically is a street circuit, but can you really count it as that? I don't really think you can. We've also got France returning this season onto the calendar, which again I think that could be very spicy. It's nice to see returning to France. I think it's the circuit of Paul Ricard, I believe it is called. A new one for Formula 1, well, in quite some time at least. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with this decision. There was an article on BBC that said that the decision regarding the Vietnam Grand Prix will be made in the following few days. An announcement will be made. However, I think that's a very, very sceptical quote to be saying. I think everyone's been, or every media outlet has been saying this about every track under the sun recently. So I personally don't think we'll see an announcement very, very soon. I think what's a more pressing issue is the fact that Silverstone, this could be its last race. And I think Liberty Media, if they want to keep fans on side, they need to keep that round 10 Silverstone Grand Prix going, or at least a British Grand Prix, though I had the chance to go to Silverstone this season for the first time, and what a shame it'll be if that goes off the circuit. It's just as bad as if we lost a Spa, a Monza. I think Monaco would be the worst to be lost, I do believe that, but I think next it would be between Spa, Monza and Silverstone. So yeah, I think Liberty need to focus on that before adding any new circuits onto the calendar. Next up, we have a return of a legend. It's Martin Whitmarsh. If you can't remember him, he used to be the McLaren team principal, and in 2014 got kicked out by big old Ron Dennis. And to be fair, Whitmarsh, he got out at the right time. Although he was kicked out, he got out at the perfect time. The last season, that was 2014, where McLaren got a podium, though they were starting to be on a downward trend. But it's the FIA who've actually employed him. And the official quote issued by the FIA is that he's been invited to be a temporary consultant to help define regulations for fair and sustainable competitions. So in essence, he's just been brought in to reduce costs and sort out the mess that costs are in Formula 1. And if you remember, back to 2012, 2013, he was a leading figure in the sport for trying to control and reduce costs. I remember him constantly bringing it up, how teams have bigger budgets than McLaren, although yes they do, but McLaren still have a hefty budget compared to the back of the field at the time. But luckily for some, unlucky for others, John Todd, the president of the FIA, after this change released a statement saying that he still believes that a budget cap in F1 is very, very unlikely. and it would just not work in the sport. And as much as I disagree with Jean Todt sometimes, and not particularly the biggest fan of the direction he wants to take a lot of sports, I think he's 100% correct here. I think Formula 1 would just break down if there was a budget cap, and it would put off manufacturers all across the globe. And so I do agree with Jean Todt in this one. It's just not going to work, is it? Let's be quite honest. And let's move on to the final Formula 1 story of this week. And it's not really a story that came out this week, it's been a combination of stories over the past month, I'd say, but it's just because this is the first episode I've not managed to cover it. And that's some third driver changes, which I'm sure some of you don't really care about who's the third driver for particular teams. However, Danny Kvyat, I did a video on that, has joined Ferrari, and it looks like he's going to be sharing third driver duties with Antonio Giovinazzi. Nicholas Latifi has joined Force India. He was at Dams last season in Formula 2, won the Silverstone race, or the first race, very impressive from the Canadian, and I think he could have a future in Formula 1, especially with that Haas team, who Gunther Steiner has come out and said he would like to sign an American or a Canadian, so that would be interesting to see him there, potentially replacing Magnussen or Grosjean. We've got Lando Norris moving to McLaren. Obviously, that was sort of decided near the end of last season, sort of replacing Nick de Vries and Jenson Button's duties there. And the big one that's happened recently is Robert Kubica is sort of completing his F1 return by becoming third driver at Williams, and will be aiming to get a drive in 2019, but that will only be if Sorokin or Stroll do a dreadful job, a Maldonado-esque job sort of thing. So I don't really see that happening, and that's all the Formula 1 news from this week. Formula 2 news then. Well, not even news necessarily again. Like I say, this first week is just going to be picking up the scrappets of the last few months. But it's going to be about the driver lineups for the Formula 2 2018 season. Now, the rule is with Formula 2, if you didn't know, whoever's world champion doesn't get a seat. So Leclerc is obviously in F1 now, but he wouldn't have been able to race in Formula 2 anyway. And also, this isn't a rule, but the reigning Constructors' World Champions, Russian time, have left the sport. So that puts Artem Markelov and Giotto without a seat for now. But 4 teams have already completed their lineups. First of all, ART have 2 very, very strong British drivers. First and second they were in the GP3 Championship, and that's Jack Aitken, who's backed by Renault, and George Russell, who's backed by Mercedes. I think those 2, especially in an ART, could definitely try and push for this World Championship. And just out of the 4 teams that have announced their drivers, it looks really competitive this season. We move on to Carlin. They've got Lando Norris, obviously the Euro F3 World Champion, and McLaren third driver / test driver, and also last year's multiple F2 winner, Sergio Sete Camara. And obviously we don't have a Brazilian in F1 at the moment, and we know we always love to see Brazilians in the sport, and Sete Camara, or Sete Camara, however you want to say it, I think did quite an impressive job in F2 last season. Didn't set the world on fire, didn't finish particularly high up the standings. However, once he got to Spa and won that first race, he really kicked on. That was the latter half of the season, so the first half was a bit shaky, but once he settled into that car, he was really impressive. Next is Charles. Don't remember them being in F2 last season. I only started watching F2 last season, so please excuse me if they were, and I'm probably, well, I know I'm pronouncing that dreadfully, but I've never heard it before, so you'll have to bear with me on that pronunciation. But they have 2 F2 drivers who I think did underperform last season, and that's Louis Delatraz and Antonio Fuoco. Potential, both of those drivers. They really need to kick on though this season if they want to break into F1. However, I do think that is unlikely. And then Prima, obviously that was Charles Leclerc's team, the Ferrari sort of B team, if you will, the Ferrari A team in F2. They have also 2 drivers who underperformed last season, but they were not in particularly good machinery, and that's Sean Gelael and Nick de Vries. Very interesting that Ferrari have pretty much signed up Nick de Vries. Obviously he's a McLaren young driver, so obviously McLaren really putting in their eggs in Lando Norris's basket now. De Vries is being kicked out a little bit, so Ferrari have said, come here Nick, you can join Prima, so that'll be interesting to see. But the last driver we've got in is who finished third in the GP3 Championships last season for Arden, and that's Narai Fukuzimi. That's a bitch to say, that is, I can't lie, excuse my language, but that is difficult to say, but I think I've done it. So, Jack Aitken, George Russell, Lando Norris, Sese Camara, Delatraz, Fuoco, Galeo, Nick De Vries and Fukuzimi. Half the grid hasn't even been announced yet, and you can already sense that this year in F2 probably going to be one of the best seasons of all time. We're still missing Ollie Rowland off that list. We're still missing Latifi, who, even though he's a Force India third driver, I reckon he'll stay in Formula 2. Artem Markelov and Giotto. Some big names there who have currently not made it into F2, but I'm confident all four of those will definitely make it. Nobuharu Matsushita as well, he's also a race winner from last season, he's not been announced either. And I think these drivers will all be re-announced for F2 this season, and I think it's going to be a real great season in Formula 2. So, that's it. That's week 1 of the Formula 1 Weekly done. Please leave your comments down below and your thoughts. This is a much longer episode than it would usually be. However, almost podcasty-ish. You know, it's almost sort of hitting that sort of length, so maybe you prefer longer videos. I know, personally, I really love Araba's Pit Lane podcast. I think the length of that is pretty much perfect, so I'm still trying to work out the length of these shows that I want to be. But before I go, I've decided to each week just sort of give you a little roundup of something I'm reading, something I watched this week that I would recommend just to keep the world of F1 ticking, and also just run a few ideas past you guys. So the first of all is I'm currently reading Mark Webber Aussie Grit, his autobiography, and I'm thinking of doing a review for that. Online there's no F1 book reviews except written ones, but YouTube book reviews just do not exist of Formula 1. So I think, personally, I would love to do that. I've never done a book review before, so I'll have to do a bit of research on how to do them. But I think that could be really interesting if you guys are thinking about getting into F1 reading. I think it's something that not enough people do and should really consider doing, and so I'm considering doing it as a review. I'm also thinking about doing reviews of films and documentaries as well, but it's just an idea that's ticking over in my head. I've also begun to make some F1 merch, nothing major, but a few t-shirt designs, mug designs, that sort of thing, and once that's up I'll probably do a short little video and put it in the banner on the channel as well. So that's it. Hopefully you guys have enjoyed. If you're new to the channel and you've stuck it through this whole episode, you can probably guess what we do here. We do F1 news, F1 reviews, Formula E, Formula 2 and anything else that's blowing up in the world of motorsport. But guys, if you have enjoyed, like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.